Okay, that'll be difficult to follow. Those are two really brilliant talks, so thank you very much, both of you. I just want to say thanks before I start to all of you for coming. And thank you especially to Kim for organising this. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you and to think about what is very difficult stuff. I've been very stimulated by what I've heard already, and I may have time to come back and respond at least to try and integrate what both of you have said and what I want to say. Because we are in uncharted waters, I would say here. We're in a new place. And it's very difficult to think about for lots of reasons. My own overriding concern at the moment is how the charge of genocide is being used. And what that means and what its significance is. Both the Jews and for Israel, on the one hand, but for everybody else also. And I want to make that connection. And I'll try and explain what that means as I go through. I think, firstly, the charge of genocide is really of fundamental significance to the development of anti-Semitism since October the 7th. It's not new, this charge. It's been made for a long time, actually. You can trace it back, certainly to the 1970s. The French philosopher Emeritus was talking about it already in the 1970s and said how delightful it must be to charge Israel with genocide. It removes any guilt that anybody feels. But actually, since Karen talked a lot about Adorno, it's there already immediately after the Holocaust in Germany. So it's got a long history. People think that it's a new charge. It isn't a new charge. What is new is the extraordinary adoption of this charge by so many people. That's new. What was previously confined to the margins has now become a kind of common sense among an astonishingly large number of people. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it signifies, to me, the definitive end of an epoch. That is to say, an epoch that roughly lasted from shortly after the Holocaust, not immediately after the Holocaust, until now. But even that is an over-optimistic reading of that period. It's not really the case that anti-Semitism was a taboo all of that time, or that anti-Semitism's centrality to the Holocaust was recognised. People often think, for example, that the Nuremberg trials placed anti-Semitism at the centre. They didn't. The Allies kept anti-Semitism as much as they could out of the Nuremberg trials. But it did make its way into it. It couldn't not do so, despite all of their best efforts. But it's not really the case that anti-Semitism was addressed centrally. The great Holocaust historian Saul Friedlander talks in his work of the 20-year silence that lasted until the early 1960s among academics. The Holocaust historian Raoul Hilberg, for example, who wrote the first major work on the Holocaust, academic work, which was published in 1961, The Destruction of the European Jews. When he started his PhD in the 1950s at Columbia, under Franz Neumann, associated with Adorno and Horkheimer, Neumann told him, not a good idea. Don't study the Holocaust. Nobody will be interested in this. And Hilberg continued, but even then, when he finished his PhD, he found it very difficult to get his PhD published. One of the people who turned it down actually was Hannah Arendt, but anyway, that's another story. So I think at best, probably, if you were really serious about it, you could say that anti-Semitism was taken seriously in the Holocaust from about 1960 to about the end of the 1980s. And then there's been a move to downplay its significance both in the Holocaust and more recently in genocide studies to try to decenter it together. And there's certainly been a kind of downgrading and relativization of Holocaust, of anti-Semitism in the Holocaust for quite a long time. But that's now been replaced. We're now in a different place. It's not a question of relativization or marginalization or downgrading. What we are now seeing is the breaking of a taboo completely. It is now possible for people right across the political spectrum and right across the world, to global form, to make statements, to march, to campaign, using openly anti-Semitic language in a way that wasn't possible before. Things can now be said not only about Israel, where large numbers of Jews live, but about Jews who are identified or identify themselves with Israel or are held to be responsible for it. With impunity, with enthusiasm, and with excitement. I come here from Britain. For months now, since October 7th, we've seen marches through the streets of London and other cities. Thousands of people, 10,000 of people, hundreds of thousands of people, chanting the most extraordinary things with, as I say, impunity, enthusiasm, and excitement. This is evident on the streets, it's evident in the media, it's evident in universities, in educational establishments. And this is astonishing. I struggle a lot to think about a comparison. When was it like this before, if it was like this before? The best I can come up with, it's not good because always historical comparisons can be invalidated if you look at this, that, and the other. But the best I can come up with is, I think, as far as the university sector is concerned, which is where I worked for a long time, it's like late 19th and early 20th century Germany. It's a kind of common sense across the political spectrum. It's something that lots of people can agree about, even if they disagree about other things. And it points to areas of agreement as well. But central to this is the charge of genocide. And this matters because what made anti-Semitism a taboo was genocide. It was because of the Holocaust that anti-Semitism was a taboo and confined to cranks, lunatics on the political margin. So if you can charge Israel with genocide, if the victims of the most radical genocide that led to the discovery of the concept of genocide and to the passing of the Genocide Convention in 1948. If it was the Jews whose experience led to that concept being developed and the convention being agreed, and now it is the Jews who are guilty of genocide, then the taboo has gone. That's the political, ethical, and legal significance of the charge. It renders Jews vulnerable in a way they haven't been since the Holocaust, and arguably perhaps even more vulnerable than they were before. So it removes the protection, the legal, ethical, the political protection that Jews had as a strength. That's the detonating charge. That's why it's so incredibly important. And this is a very difficult thing to deal with because it's so mad. And I have to use this word. It's crazy. How is it possible that the charge of genocide can be made against Jews after October the 7th, especially. That's the puzzle. Because that is when a genocidal assault took place against Jews. This isn't rocket science, as we say sometimes. You don't have to be a genius to read the Hamas charter. You don't have to be an archivist to look at this and try and work it out. Hamas have been arguing this for a long time. This is what they want to do. And this is what they did. The intent that lay behind the assault on October 7th was openly genocidal. It was to kill as many Jews, not just as Israelis, but as Jews, as possible, in as short a time as possible, and then to carry on doing it. Now, if you read the Genocide Convention, and again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to look it up. It's there on the internet. It's a couple of pages. Right? It lays out very clearly what the crime of genocide is. It's the intent to destroy a group in whole or in part, as such. And then it lists a series of acts. But those acts, which include centrally involved killing, but there are other sets of acts, it lists 5 sets of acts, are acts which have to be carried out for the crime of genocide to be agreed with the intent to destroy the group. But those are precisely the acts that Hamas committed. So you have on the one hand the general intent to destroy the group as such, and on the other hand the acts inspired by that intent. It's there. And actually in the history of genocide, this is, which I've been studying and writing and campaigning about for a long time, quite unusual. Usually genocidal perpetrators try to hide what they're doing. In this case, they don't. So we now have the extraordinary situation in which the charge of genocide is being laid against the victims, and the perpetrators of genocide are holding the victims. This is an upside down world. And the question is, how can we understand what's happening when words are turned into their opposite, when the most fundamental concepts that we have are turned upside down? And the reason that genocide matters so much, I want to go back to it, is that the crime of genocide is the most serious crime that can be committed. It lies at the apex of international law. Right? The Genocide Convention was introduced in December 1948, 24 hours before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That tells you something about the statement. Right? It sits at the apex of international law. Right? I'm not saying it's a perfect document, it isn't. It's flawed in some ways. The groups that it identifies as vulnerable is insufficient. Right? National groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, racial groups. It means racialized groups because there are no races, but that's not an adequate list. But it's not a bad list. I mean, we could add to it. Efforts to add to it have failed, so we have to accept what we have. Let us not make the best the enemy of the good. But it's there. The Rome Statute, which led to the formation of the International Criminal Court, places genocide at the apex of international law. Tribunals have repeatedly said it is the greatest crime of all. The Rwandan tribunal called it the crime of crimes. Right? It's the most serious crime that can be committed. So what happens to us, to humanity, to the normative framework within which we operate, when this crucial term is inverted and upside down? I don't have a good enough answer to this question, but that's the challenge that we have to face. But it's a challenge that faces both Jews and everybody else. And I want to make that point very strongly because there is a connection, a central connection between the universal and the particular. The Convention says very clearly that genocide is a crime, an odious crime that has afflicted humanity throughout history, and we have to put a stop to it now. And we have to protect all the groups that make up humanity. And the reasoning, which is really the reasoning that Raphael Lemkin, the developer of the concept, which was animated here, and not only here, you can find it in Hannah Arendt, you can find it in Adorno and Horkheimer, and the most serious thinkers. The reasoning is this: that humanity is essentially diverse. It's made up of lots of groups of people. Made up of lots of individuals, but also groups. These groups are not to be thought about in a reified, centralized way. You can't move from one group to another, or abandon one group, or mixed groups, or a complex identity. On the contrary, but an assault on a group is at one and the same time also an assault on humanity because humanity is diverse. If the Nazis had been successful, and they nearly were, in their attempt to annihilate the Jews, it would have affected Jews, obviously, the group would have been destroyed. But humanity itself would have been impoverished. This was meant to be central instinct. So we have to protect groups. That's the point of the convention. Now, if the concept of genocide is invalidated, subverted, turned upside down, it isn't just Jews who are it. Every group that is threatened with annihilation, destruction, is at risk too, can't be protected. So there is an important and crucial connection between the assault on Jews and the assault on humanity. This is another way of thinking about what the experience, I think. So how has this happened? And how can we understand this inversion? I think we have a number of sources, and I will just mention three. One is Marx, actually, because Marx's notion of ideology is complex. It includes in it the idea that what passes for common sense is the opposite of what is going on. It's the world, what people think is the case, what is actually the case, are not the same thing. And we need to think critically about what passes for common sense. And to the extent that anti-Semitism is now part of common sense, we have to think about it in that way, as ideology, as the world turned upside down. Then there is Adorno and Horkheimer, and I won't really add anything to what Karen has said, which was really brilliant, actually, really brilliant. Except to say two things about them. One is that they have an understanding of the complexity of anti-Semitism, which is completely missing. It isn't just that people don't pay attention to anti-Semitism, but even when they do, they have an extraordinarily crude and reductive and simplistic understanding of it as only a form of racism. But it's much more complicated than that. And in the last chapter of Dialectics of Enlightenment, when they talk about elements of anti-Semitism, they do make you think about the many different dimensions and the complexity of anti-Semitism. And I want to come back to that in a minute. But in particular, I think, it's not the only element, clearly, there are many elements that they identify. They do talk about the psychological element, in particular the importance of projection. And another thinker who talked about projection was called Sartre, in his work, The Legacy of the Jew. And I think this is also very important. And a crucial point that Sartre makes is that anti-Semitism is not a rational position. It's not based on an understanding, on evidence, on reason, on logic. You can't argue with an anti-Semite because it isn't reason and evidence and logic that they depend on. What drives the anti-Semite, as he puts it, is passion. It's emotion. And what is then projected from inside the anti-Semite onto the Jew. It's interesting to me that Sartre, with all of his hostility to psychoanalysis, actually joins Adorno and Kingston. But this, of course, makes it very difficult for us, because I try to understand anti-Semitism, its significance. We depend on reason and evidence and logic. So what do we do if people who reason and evidence and logic have no significance at all? And that's what one sees in the reaction to October the 7th. But I want to say something more about the passion. Because I think what one witnesses, both on the streets and on the media and in universities, is excitement about the claims that are being made. When you can see this in all the campus occupations and fervour and enthusiasm. And I think, haven't thought enough about this, and I think some of this has to do with what happens when a taboo gets broken. And I think there is something self-radicalizing in a movement which is free from a taboo. And the connection I would make is between what happened in the Nazi elite and what is happening in mass movements today. And a rather brilliant, really brilliant essay by Friedlander, together. He wrote a wonderful piece on the limits of historical understanding, in which he tried to understand a famous speech given by Himmler in Poznan in 1943. And Himmler in that speech was talking to his fellow SS elites, the very people who'd been involved in murdering large numbers of people, not just in the camps, but in mass shootings. And he talks to them. It's a speech that really gets a lot of psychoanalytic thinking, which is what Friedlander did, trying to understand it. And in it he talks about excitement. Himmler says to his colleagues, we all know what it's like to kill one person, 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people. And he's drawing your attention, their attention, to once you kill one, you can kill 10. Once you kill 10, you can kill 100. Once you kill 100, you can kill 1,000. Once you kill 1,000, you can kill 10. So he's pointing to kind of self-radicalization that occurs when a boundary's been crossed. And I think there's something going on there about the boundary being crossed. I said yesterday, and I do want to bring back partly because Good is not here, and I want to kind of bring his insight in. When I was in New York recently talking to him, he said to me on a walk, what kind of a world do these demonstrators want? What is their want? What is their ideal society? And I think that's a very important question. And it points to something about the contemporary left especially, and why it is able to pick up themes from the far right, and why anti-Semitism is so attractive to so many people across the political spectrum. Because there is no positive model. There is no vision of the world is filled with anything positive. It's focused on destruction. And I think there's something profoundly nihilistic about it. And so while it appears, and Harry in particular has quoted some people who have been eminent for a long time on the left as supposedly serious critical thinkers, actually they don't have a positive vision of the world at all. They have a nihilistic project, if there is a problem. It is a radicalism which is essentially destructive, but also very difficult to say. I can make a charge, but I don't need to know anything. I mean, it's sort of mind-boggling. But it's interesting because it's about will-building. It's something I don't want to think about. I don't want to think about anti-Semitism. If I have to think about anti-Semitism, I don't want to think about its complexity. If I think about it, I want to relegate it, diminish it, denigrate it, push it aside. So there is actually a refusal to think at the heart of people who think they are thinkers. And this is an extraordinary development. I'm going to stop in a minute, but I just want to say a couple of things in response to especially points that Karen has made, but also to Kim's point about the coalition as well, and where it's leading. I think, although we are in a new place, we can trace this back. This is not a good enough answer to the challenge that Karen's laid out. But I do want to bring in something that we often ignore, and I'm speaking about this from somebody who's been involved politically on the left for a long time, and that is Stalinism. And I say that because at one level, there is nothing in contemporary anti-Zionism that wasn't fabricated by the Stalinists. I mean, it's been repackaged as post-colonial theory, but actually, it's not new at all. There are no new arguments. And this is not an accident. Because although the Soviet Union and its model has disappeared, its legacy and its nihilism and its violence and its cruelty and its destructive are there. What's left is nothing positive but that destructive and essentially anti-Semitic ideology. And I think we need to connect some dots. And therefore I want to think a little bit about loneliness, which Alejandro talked about, and you talked about. And it's a loneliness that you feel, I think everybody in this room must have felt it a lot. Whenever a group of people come together to think about anti-Semitism today, there's a kind of relief about meeting people who think about it and take it seriously. You mean I'm not the only one who's serious? I'm not sitting alone, reading this filth, watching this stuff. I'm a man, and you realise there are a few other same people around. So it has a therapeutic component to it. Is this the first time we've all felt so lonely? And again, I think the Stalinist experience is important, actually. What was it like if you were a serious socialist in 1930, caught between the fascists and Nazis and the Stalinists? So I don't think it's a completely new experience. And it was recoverable from, but not perhaps in the truth.